The judge's voice cut through the courtroom like a knife. She never wore a uniform in her life, my father told the jury. Not one single day. And if she tells you different, that's a lie. 9 people stared at me. One had sold us seed corn when I was 12. One sat in church with my mother for 20 years. Another had given me a peppermint in this same courthouse lobby when I was a kid. I didn't move. My father was suing me for stealing from my dead mother's trust. What he didn't know, what his lawyer didn't know, what nobody in this county knew, was that my attorney had a sealed envelope from the Pentagon sitting in his briefcase. And before this day ended, the judge would take off his glasses, look straight at me, and say 4 words that would change everything. All rise. The water in my paper cup tasted like metal and old pipes. That's the kind of detail your brain holds on to when your whole life splits in two. The scratches on the witness stand under my fingertips. The hum of the lights. The lemon smell of floor polish trying to cover up old wood and my father's cologne. The same cologne he'd been wearing since the 80s. My name is Margaret Stone. I was 43 years old that morning, sitting in a witness box while my father destroyed me in front of the whole county. Robert Stone was 71. Shoulders still broad from farming. Hands rough and knuckled. Fingers that pointed when he was disappointed. In our part of Kentucky, people listened when he talked. He'd run the county planning board for 12 years. He'd been on the church finance committee forever. He'd spent his whole life building a reputation where other men lowered their voices when they disagreed with him. He wore his best blazer that day. The charcoal one. The funeral wool. The kind you wear when you want to look like you already won. His lawyer was Martin Bell, standing with a yellow pad and a folder stuffed with papers he believed would destroy me. Martin had practiced estate law in this county for 30 years. He believed in facts you could pull from file drawers. Deeds. Tax maps. Wills. He believed the whole world fit inside a filing cabinet. The trust requires, Martin told the jury, pacing with smooth confidence, that any beneficiary receiving money must be actively employed in public service or engaged in documented lawful work. He turned and gestured at me with his open hand. The defendant claims military service. She claims federal employment. But our investigation found no verifiable military record through standard channels. No public employment file. No evidence that Ms. Stone served in any capacity she's told her family about. He held up a document. His hands were steady. Alleged, he said. Not proven. Alleged. My attorney, Daniel Mercer, sat at our table without moving. He was 48, former Army JAG officer, dark suit, silver tie clipped perfectly straight. He had the kind of stillness that makes loud men think you're weak. He didn't fidget. He didn't whisper. He'd read every document, every letter, every insult dressed up as evidence. He knew what was coming. He also knew not to move too soon. I folded my hands on the rail in front of me. Training settles into your bones. After enough years, you learn that how you sit isn't just about comfort. It's about control. It's about staying sealed when everything inside you wants to come apart. My sister, Jennifer, sat 3 rows behind my father in a navy sweater, both hands gripping her purse strap. She hadn't looked at me once since we walked in. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I thought she'd pick my side. I'd prepared for that. But somewhere deep down, the stupid part of me that should have died years ago still hoped she'd look up and remember who I actually was before this room told her otherwise. My mother, Patricia, had created this trust 2 years before she died. Nothing huge by city standards, but significant here. Enough to matter. Enough to help. Enough to destroy if you knew how to use it as a weapon. She'd written one condition into it that I recognized immediately. She was protecting what she couldn't protect directly anymore. Distributions to her daughters required proof of active work. Military service. Federal employment. Something real. My mother understood my father better than anyone. She knew that without limits, he'd turn procedure into punishment. She was right. 3 months after her funeral, he started challenging everything I'd taken from the trust. He hired an investigator. He made phone calls. He asked questions at the VFW. At the tax office. At church. At the feed store. By the time the lawsuit came, half the county had heard his version. Margaret ran away years ago. Margaret invented a military career nobody could verify. Margaret's stealing from her dead mother while she hides behind some government job that doesn't exist. In a town like ours, repetition turns into truth faster than facts ever could. Miss Stone, Martin said, turning toward me, would you please explain to the jury why there appears to be no record of military service available through any of the standard channels our investigator used? Daniel stood halfway up. Your Honor, asked and answered. Judge Raymond Ellison looked over the bench. Overruled. She may answer. I lifted my eyes to Martin first, then to the jury. Bill Colley had fixed our tractor when I was 16. Susan Myers had brought potato salad to my mother's funeral. They all looked politely uncertain. That's what public humiliation looks like in a small county. It doesn't come with anger. It comes wearing manners. My records exist, I said. Martin smiled slightly. Then where are they? The room went still. I could feel my father watching me. Not confused. Hungry. He'd waited years for this. Years to drag me into a place where silence looked like guilt and privacy looked like lying. I kept my voice level. Not all services are designed for public convenience. A soft murmur moved through the gallery. Martin turned to the jury like I'd just handed him a gift. So your answer is that the evidence can't be seen because it's too secret to verify? No, I said. My answer is that your inability to access something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That's when my father stood up. His chair scraped across the courtroom floor like a knife on metal. He didn't shout. Robert Stone never shouted when he could use his voice differently. Projection carried more authority. She is lying, he said. The judge's expression tightened. Mr. Stone, sit down. But my father kept staring at me. She left this family. She left her mother to handle everything alone. And now she wants this court to believe she was off serving her country in some invisible way that nobody can prove. He pointed. His finger was steady. She never wore a uniform. Not one day. And if she says she did, that is a lie. I looked at him. Really looked at the red in his eyes, at the hard line of his jaw, at the satisfaction he was trying to hide. He thought this moment made him righteous. Daniel Mercer stood. Your Honor, the defense would like permission to submit a document that wasn't available during discovery. Martin turned immediately, frowning. My father blinked once. Jennifer finally lifted her head. Daniel placed one hand on his briefcase, and for the first time that morning, I felt the room shift. Growing up on Stone Land, 5 miles outside of Mill Haven, meant you understood early that words had weight. But not everyone's words carried the same load. My father's voice carried. Mine didn't. The house was long and low, built in the late 70s with a porch that sagged on the east side just enough to collect rainwater. The kitchen smelled like coffee and bacon grease most mornings, the kind of smell that soaks into wood and stays. I was the older daughter. That meant expectations without explanation. It meant you were supposed to know how to behave without being told. It meant people measured you not by what you did right, but by how much less trouble you caused. Jennifer was born 5 years after me, and from the moment she could talk, she knew how to laugh at the right moment. She knew how to make a room feel warmer. She knew how to make my father feel seen. Jennifer fit. She fit the shape my father thought a daughter should take. Helpful. Warm. Agreeable. Rooted. I asked questions. Not loud ones. Not defiant ones. Just precise ones. Why that way? What happens if we try something different? In my father's world, questions weren't curiosity. They were disrespect. I remember standing in the barn aisle one afternoon when I was 14, holding a ledger book, trying to make the feed costs match the receipts he'd stapled to the page. The numbers were off. Not by much. By enough. "Dad," I said, "this total doesn't match the receipts from last week." He didn't look at the book. "It's fine. It's off by $43. Now he looked at me. Not at the page. At me. "You planning to run this place someday?" I just wanted to add up. "It adds up because I say it does," he said. "That's how it works." That was the end of that conversation. My mother, Patricia, stood in the mudroom doorway, dish towel in her hands. She watched the exchange the way she watched storms coming over the back field. Alert. But not interfering unless she absolutely had to. Later that night, she came into my room and sat on my bed. "You're not wrong," she said quietly. "I know." She smiled. "Tired. Knowing and saying are two different things in this house." "Then what am I supposed to do?" She took her time answering. My mother never rushed answers. She weighed them like she was balancing something fragile. "You learn when it matters," she said. "And when it doesn't. You learn the difference." That was her way. She didn't fight my father directly. She moved around him. She found quiet ways to protect what she could without breaking the structure she lived in. She kept copies of things. She wrote notes. She remembered details. And she watched me. I didn't understand then that she was measuring something. Not my obedience. My endurance. By the time I was 18, I knew two things for certain. First, if I stayed, I would always be the version of myself my father found lacking. Second, leaving would cost me everything I knew as home. I chose leaving. There was no ceremony. No goodbye dinner. No speech. Just a duffel bag on the porch and a truck ride into town that rattled over every pothole on the road. We didn't talk much during that drive. At the bus station, my father put the truck in park and kept both hands on the wheel. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Yes." "You think the military's going to fix whatever you think is broken in you?" I didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer he'd accept. He nodded like he'd confirmed something for himself. "Don't come back here looking for a handout. We take care of our own. We don't carry people who won't carry their weight." "I won't," I said. He looked at me then. Really looked. Like he was trying to decide if I believed what I was saying or if I was just saying it to escape. "Good," he said. "Because I won't do it." That was the last conversation we had before basic training. My mother hugged me at the door that morning. Not in front of him. After he walked out to check the truck. She held on longer than usual. "Do right when you can," she said into my shoulder. "I will." She pulled back just enough to look at me. "Not everything you do will be understood," she said. "That doesn't make it wrong." I nodded. At the time, I thought she meant the military. I would understand later she meant everything. Basic training stripped things down fast. It removed the parts of me that were just performance and left what actually worked under pressure. I found something there I'd never found at home. Clarity. In the army, questions weren't disrespect if you asked them right, for the right reason, at the right time. Precision mattered. Accuracy mattered. Results mattered. It was the first place I'd ever been where being exact wasn't a flaw to fix. I wrote letters home at first. My mother wrote back. My father didn't. When I finished training and moved into my first assignment, the letters came less often. Not because I stopped caring, but because the life I was entering didn't translate onto paper. There were things I could say and things I couldn't. The space between those two categories got wider every year. Jennifer sent a few notes early on. Short. Bright. Full of small town updates. Who got married? Who moved away? Eventually, those stopped too. Not suddenly. Gradually. The way contact fades when nobody's actively holding it together. By the time my mother got sick, the distance between us wasn't just miles. It was narrative. My father had filled in the blanks I left with a version of me that made sense to him. Margaret ran away. Margaret didn't come back. Margaret won't talk about what she does. Margaret must not be doing anything worth talking about. In a town where being visible is the same as being true, that story stuck. When the diagnosis came, I came home as often as I could. Not as often as my father thought I should. Not as often as Jennifer managed. But I came. Hospitals have their own kind of silence. Not the absence of sound. The layering of it. Monitors. Footsteps. Distant voices. All softened by walls that have heard too much. My mother never asked what I did. She asked if I was safe. She asked if I was eating. She asked if I was sleeping. Once, when we were alone and the machines were quiet, she said, "Are you where you're supposed to be?" "Yes," I said. She studied my face like she was checking something only she could see. "Good," she said. "Then don't let anyone make you smaller than that." She died in January. The ground was hard. The sky was gray. The kind of cold that settles in and doesn't leave. At the will reading, my father sat at the head of the table the way he always had. Hands folded. Expression controlled to look like grief. When the trust conditions were read, when the distributions explained, when it was all over, he didn't look at me. He looked at the attorney. "We'll be reviewing all distributions." That moment was the beginning. Not with anger. With procedure. 3 months later, I was served with a lawsuit. Trust fraud. In my father's version of events, it was logical. Because if he couldn't see what I'd done with my life, then it didn't exist. By my 6th year in uniform, I'd stopped trying to translate what I did into anything that sounded normal. Not because my family couldn't understand it. Because understanding wasn't the problem. Permission was. Some things don't belong to the person doing them. They belong to the work itself. To the structure that requires them. To the people depending on them. My early assignments were normal enough on paper. Communications analysis. Pattern tracking. The kind of work that doesn't make headlines but decides what happens before headlines exist. You look at fragments. You build context. You learn the difference between noise and signal. It suited me. Precision always had. In my father's world, precision was a challenge to his authority. In mine, it was survival. I moved where I was told. I learned what I was told. I kept my head down. My work clean. My voice measured. The first time my role shifted, it wasn't announced. There was no ceremony. No speech. Just a conversation in an office that required 2 separate badges to enter. "You're being reassigned," the man across from me said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Where?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. "You'll be given a cover designation. Administrative analysis. Contract support. Nothing that invites questions." "And the actual work?" He met my eyes. Not unkindly. "The actual work is why you're here." That was the moment I understood my life had split into 2 tracks. One that could be described. One that couldn't. On paper, I became a mid-level analyst attached to a logistics group with a name so bland it would pass through conversations without leaving a trace. In reality, I spent my days in rooms where the clocks were synchronized to systems you didn't question, and the doors closed behind you with a sound that told you exactly how far from ordinary life you'd stepped. By the time my mother's health declined, the narrative about me in Mill Haven had solidified into something fixed. I was the daughter who left. The daughter who never really came back. The daughter who said she worked for the government but couldn't explain how. The daughter who had found a way to make money without ever getting her hands dirty. My mother saw it happening. She never confronted it directly. That wasn't her way. But she made adjustments where she could. The trust was one of them. She didn't tell me she was creating it. I learned about it the same way everyone else did, sitting in a quiet office with a lawyer who read the terms in a voice neutral enough to make them feel final. The trust provides for equal distributions to both daughters, he said. Conditional upon demonstration of active employment, public service, or lawful work engagement at the time of disbursement. I understood immediately. My mother had built a safeguard, not against me, but against interpretation. She knew my father would try to control what she left behind. This was her way of limiting how far that control could reach. The first challenge came quietly. A letter. Formal. Structured. Written by an attorney I recognized from land disputes all over the county. I responded through appropriate channels. Limited confirmation. Enough to satisfy the requirement as it was written. The second letter was less polite. The third included a demand. The fourth was a notice. By then, my father had already begun telling people what he believed. She's been taking money she didn't earn, he said at the diner over coffee that had been sitting too long. Says she was in the military all these years. Funny how nobody can prove it. At church, the story shifted slightly. We did our part here, he told the pastor. Kept things going. Took care of her mother. And now she shows up when there's money involved. At the feed store, it hardened. She's living off a story, he said. Always has. By the time the lawsuit was filed, the narrative had turned into something that felt like common sense to everyone hearing it. Of course she couldn't prove it. Of course the records didn't exist. Of course she'd found a way to work the system. When the court date was set, I knew exactly what I was walking into. Not just a legal proceeding. A correction. My father intended to correct the record in the only place left that could make it official. The Marin County Courthouse hadn't changed since I was a kid. Same oak doors. Same scuffed steps. Same hallway that carried voices further than people realized. The same clock above the clerk's window, always a few minutes off. Daniel and I arrived early. He didn't speak much as we walked in. He didn't need to. His presence was its own kind of preparation. Measured. Controlled. Attentive. He nodded to the clerk, signed us in, and chose our table without hesitation. Everything is in place, he said quietly as he set his briefcase down. I knew what that meant. The authorization had come through. Not easily. Not quickly. But it had come.